The dark tunnel. It was a cold autumn evening. The wind howled through the bare branches of the trees, scattering fallen leaves everywhere. Alex decided to take his usual route home from work. This path led through an old tunnel outside the city. The tunnel had been abandoned for a long time, and no one preferred to pass through it. However, Alex often used it as a shortcut. As he approached the entrance of the tunnel, a chill ran down his spine. Even from the outside, it was clear how dark and eerie the inside of the tunnel was. Alex took a deep breath, stepped inside, and turned on his phone's flashlight. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the tunnel, piercing the silence. It was as dark as expected, and only the weak light from his phone illuminated his path. About halfway through, his phone's battery began to die, and the light dimmed. As Alex hurriedly tried to pull out his spare battery from his pocket, he heard a noise from the depths of the tunnel. It sounded like someone or something was moving in the dark corners. His heart started pounding, and he panicked. But this fear urged him to move faster. He finally managed to change the battery, and the flashlight came back on. When the light illuminated the dark walls of the tunnel, he was confronted with a terrifying sight. There were dry blood stains and old, dark writings on the walls of the tunnel. He couldn't understand what the writings meant, but a sense of dread filled him. He quickened his pace and started running towards the end of the tunnel. At that moment, the noise from the depths of the tunnel came again. This time, it was closer and clearer. Alex didn't dare look back and kept running. However, the footsteps were getting closer. Just when he thought he was near the exit of the tunnel, a shadow appeared in front of him. From the darkness, a mysterious creature with an unseen face slowly advanced towards him. At that moment, the noise from the depths of the tunnel came again. This time, it was closer and clearer. Alex didn't dare look back and kept running. However, the footsteps were getting closer. Just when he thought he was near the exit of the tunnel, a shadow appeared in front of him. From the darkness, a mysterious creature with an unseen face slowly advanced towards him. Alex stepped back in fear and almost fell. As the mysterious creature slowly approached, the details of its face became clearer. Its eyes glowed in the dark, and its face was covered with deep scars. Alex, in a state of helplessness, leaned against the walls of the tunnel. When the creature reached him, it quietly muttered something. When he heard its voice, Alex's blood froze. The creature seemed to be reciting curses in an ancient language. In a final act of courage, Alex picked up a stone from the ground and threw it at the creature. When the stone hit the creature, there was a moment of silence. Then the creature vanished, and a deep silence prevailed in the tunnel. Alex quickly ran toward the exit of the tunnel and finally made it outside. It was still dark outside, but he took a deep breath, relieved to be away from the horrors inside the tunnel. When he got home, he was still in shock. He was too terrified to tell anyone about the horrifying events in the tunnel. That night, he thought about who the mysterious creature he encountered in the tunnel was and what it wanted. But without finding an answer, he fell asleep. In the coming days, he decided to avoid the tunnel. However, every night before he slept, the creature's eyes and dark mutterings haunted his mind. Alex swore never to go near the tunnel again. But one day, he would wake up to a sound coming from the tunnel and realize that the terror had started anew. Weeks passed. Despite staying away from the tunnel, Alex continued to have nightmares about the terrifying creature. These nightmares became increasingly realistic and frightening. One night, he woke up again from the same nightmare. He sat up in bed, drenched in sweat and out of breath. Suddenly, he heard movement outside his house. It seemed like something was approaching his window. Gathering his courage, Alex approached the window and looked outside. He saw something moving in the dark. His heart began to race, and he quickly turned on the lights inside the house. But he saw nothing. When he turned back, he found a note on the windowsill. It had only one word written on it: return. The next morning, Alex pondered the meaning of the note. Despite his fear, he was sure the note had something to do with the tunnel. Maybe he needed to return to the tunnel and face what had been left unfinished that night. Despite the fears in his mind, he decided to uncover the tunnel's secret. That night, Alex returned to the entrance of the tunnel with a powerful flashlight in one hand and a knife in the other. The echoing footsteps and the shadows in the dark corners of the tunnel once again filled him with terror. Taking a deep breath, he continued forward. When he reached the middle of the tunnel, the voice of the mysterious creature was heard again. This time, the creature was clearer and advancing rapidly towards Alex. Alex tried to retreat, but the creature caught him. Everything went black in an instant. The next morning, the police found Alex's body at the entrance of the tunnel. His face was frozen in a mask of terror, his eyes wide open in shock. There were no clues or evidence around. Only one final word written in his notebook stood out: I shouldn't have returned. The tunnel kept its secrets once again. Alex's death created a new story about the mysterious creature and the curse of the tunnel. Now, no one dared to enter that tunnel, because everyone knew that the darkness inside the tunnel hid a terrifying truth: the family's final journey. A family was driving back from a long weekend trip. Their journey had been delightful, filled with the beauty of nature. However, as night fell, a sense of silence and loneliness began to envelop them, bringing with it a feeling of desolation. As they tried to shake off the tension during their trip, the family members found themselves entering a long, dark tunnel. The darkness around them grew more intense with every passing meter. Despite turning on their lights, the end of the tunnel seemed unreachable. The youngest son of the family eagerly anticipated exiting the tunnel. Will this tunnel never end? He couldn't help but ask. His mother tried to calm him down, saying, Patience, dear. We'll be out soon. But suddenly, a shadow appeared on the car's windshield. The car shook to a halt, and the family members anxiously looked outside. The shadow was rapidly approaching, instilling a sense of fear in everyone. This time, their father's voice was heard. What dangers might we encounter here? He asked. His son, eyes trembling with fear, said, I wish we had never entered. His mother, sharing the same thoughts, added, Yes, I feel like something is going wrong in this tunnel. As they moved further into the tunnel, their car's engine suddenly stopped. With trembling hands, the father tried to restart the car, but it was in vain. Just then, they heard a noise outside. The family members looked out in horror. The inside of the tunnel was growing darker, and a heavy darkness was descending upon them. Suddenly, the darkness around them combined with a thick smoke, blinding their eyes. The family members clung to each other in fear, calling for help. The smoke began to fill the car, making it difficult to breathe. With one of them panicking, the family lost control of the situation and began to helplessly accept their fate. Suddenly, a voice was heard. A merciless and cold voice. Welcome, travelers. Who are you? It said. The family members looked around in horror. There was no one in the room, only that cold, dark voice. The father's voice trembled as he shouted, Who? Who are you? Let us go. But the voice only echoed its laughter around them. The family members clung to each other tightly, not knowing what to do in their fear and anxiety. In the face of rapidly unfolding events, they had lost control. Suddenly, one of them had an idea. Maybe it's a trap. They might want to harm us. Maybe. No, this situation was beyond reason. The family members looked at each other, silently agreeing. The father gathered his courage and decided to speak again. "If you want us to see the source of your voice, please show yourself," he said. At that moment, the smoke lightened, and the darkness around them slowly began to recede like a curtain. The shadow gradually became clearer, revealing a silhouette. When they realized the silhouette was a woman, the family members were even more astonished. The woman looked at them with mysteriously glowing eyes and began to speak with a quiet smile. "Welcome. This is the deepest and darkest part of the tunnel. I've been expecting you," she said. The family members exchanged confused glances before responding to the woman. "Who sent you? What do you want?" the father asked, unable to hide the worry in his voice. The woman took a slow step forward, and the light spreading through the dark tunnel illuminated her face. The woman's smile slightly reassured the family members. She continued speaking quietly. "My name is Elara. I have met you here for a special mission. This tunnel is a gateway that opens to the realm of spirits. I must choose one of you," she said. The family members looked at each other in shock. Elara, with a sorrowful expression, turned to the family and continued. "One of you must make a sacrifice for the freedom of the trapped souls in this tunnel." "I have to make this choice," she said. The family members silently tried to communicate with each other. Finally, the father bravely stepped forward and began to speak to Elara. "I will take on this mission. I will do anything to protect my family and loved ones," he said. Elara looked at him sadly, nodding in agreement. Suddenly, a violent wind began to blow inside the tunnel. Elara reached out to the father and, with a warm smile, kissed him one last time, saying, "Your sacrifice will be the light that frees the trapped souls in this tunnel." The family members watched in shock. The father's body suddenly became lighter and vanished, leaving them alone with Elara. The wind still blew softly inside the tunnel, but the darkness was less oppressive now. But then, a scream echoed through the tunnel. Darkness quickly enveloped them. Elara looked at the family in horror. "I should have warned you. It was a grave mistake to enter this tunnel," she said. The family members, clutching each other in fear, didn't know what to do. The darkness quickly surrounded and began to suffocate them. Elara, with her last effort, opened her hands and muttered magical words. But it was too late. The darkness in the tunnel had swallowed the family, trapping them forever. The family's anguished screams echoed through the tunnel as Elara slowly faded into the background, sorrowful. The tunnel was now silent, dominated only by darkness, silence, and death. Shortly after, the other spirits who served as guides in the tunnel learned of the father's sacrifice and decided to honor his memory forever. However, the family members were never seen again in the dark tunnel from that day on. It was said that time had stopped in that fear-filled tunnel, that souls were trapped, and the thin line between life and death had been erased. The family never returned, and the dark tunnel became a cursed place, forever haunted by the souls trapped within. The endless tunnel. It was a cold winter evening in Colorado. The Anderson family, John, his wife Sarah, and their teenage children, Emily and Jake, were returning from a skiing trip in the Rockies. The journey had been filled with laughter, stunning views, and memorable moments. However, as night fell, an uneasy silence began to envelop them, accentuated by the vast, empty stretches of road. Their route home took them through the Eisenhower Johnson Memorial Tunnel, one of the longest mountain tunnels in the United States. As they approached the tunnel entrance, a sense of foreboding washed over them. The towering concrete maw of the tunnel seemed to swallow the light, leading into an abyss of darkness. John tried to shake off the eerie feeling as he drove the family's SUV into the tunnel. The headlights cut through the blackness, but the walls seemed to close in around them. "This tunnel goes on forever," Jake muttered from the back seat. His sister, Emily, nervously agreed. Yeah, it feels like it's never going to end. Sarah, trying to keep the mood light, turned on the radio, but all they heard was static. She frowned and tried changing stations, but the static persisted. Strange, she said, turning the radio off. The silence inside the car became deafening, broken only by the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of tires on the road. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. Shouldn't we be out by now? Emily asked, her voice tinged with panic. John nodded, checking the clock. They had been in the tunnel far longer than expected. He pressed the gas pedal a little harder, hoping to see the light at the end. Suddenly, the SUV's headlights flickered, then died, plunging them into pitch-black darkness. John slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a stop. "What the hell?" he exclaimed, frantically trying to restart the car. The engine sputtered but refused to turn over. Without warning, a chilling, echoing laughter filled the tunnel. The family froze, fear gripping their hearts. "What was that?" Jake whispered. Sarah held onto John's arm, her face pale with fear. "It sounded like it came from outside," she said, her voice trembling. John, mustering his courage, grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment. "Stay here. I'll check it out," he said. As he stepped out of the car, the cold air of the tunnel hit him like a wall. He shone the flashlight around, but the beam barely penetrated the darkness. The laughter echoed again, louder this time, followed by the faint sound of footsteps. John's heart pounded in his chest as he followed the sound. He didn't get far before the flashlight flickered and went out. Plunged into darkness, he heard a whisper right next to his ear. "You shouldn't have come here." Terrified, John stumbled back to the car. "We need to get out of here now," he shouted. But as he reached for the door handle, he saw a shadowy figure standing next to the car, staring at his family through the window. The figure was tall, with glowing red eyes and a sinister grin. John lunged at the figure, but it vanished into thin air. "Drive, Sarah. Get us out of here," he yelled, jumping back into the car. Sarah tried the ignition again, and miraculously, the engine roared to life. She floored the gas pedal, and the SUV surged forward. As they sped through the tunnel, the shadowy figure reappeared, this time in front of them. Sarah swerved to avoid it, but the car skidded and slammed into the tunnel wall. The impact knocked them all unconscious. When they came to, they found themselves in complete darkness. The car's interior lights were out, and the tunnel was eerily silent. John, groaning in pain, turned to check on his family. They were bruised but alive. "We need to move," he said, his voice shaky. They climbed out of the wrecked car, using their phones as flashlights. The tunnel seemed even longer now, stretching endlessly in both directions. They decided to walk, hoping to find an exit. As they walked, they noticed strange markings on the tunnel walls, symbols and words in a language they didn't recognize. The air grew colder, and a sense of dread hung over them. Suddenly, Emily screamed, pointing at a shadowy figure approaching from the darkness. The figure was identical to the one John had seen earlier, but this time it was accompanied by others' ghostly apparitions with hollow eyes and twisted smiles. The family huddled together, backing away slowly. Out of nowhere, the apparitions lunged at them. John swung his flashlight, trying to fend them off, but it passed through them as if they were made of smoke. The family ran, but the ghosts were relentless, their cold, spectral hands grasping at them. Emily stumbled and fell, one of the ghosts reaching for her. John turned back, grabbing his daughter and pulling her to her feet. "Keep running," he shouted. They ran until they were out of breath, the ghosts always just a step behind. Suddenly, The tunnel opened up into a vast underground chamber filled with bones and ancient relics. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols. At the center of the chamber stood an altar with a glowing crystal. The apparitions halted at the entrance, unable to enter the chamber. "We have to destroy that crystal," John said, panting. "It's their power source." He grabbed a large rock and with all his strength smashed it against the crystal. The crystal shattered and a blinding light filled the chamber. The apparitions screamed and vanished into thin air. Relieved, the family collapsed to the ground, exhausted. They thought it was over, but then they heard a deep, rumbling sound. The chamber started to collapse. "We have to get out of here," Sarah screamed. They scrambled to their feet and ran back into the tunnel, dodging falling debris. They ran until they saw a faint light in the distance, the tunnel's exit. With renewed energy, they sprinted towards it. As they burst out of the tunnel, they collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. The tunnel behind them sealed shut, leaving no trace of the horrors they had faced. The Anderson family never spoke of that night again. The tunnel was closed off permanently, declared unsafe due to structural instability, but those who lived nearby whispered of the haunted tunnel and the family who barely escaped its clutches. And deep within the Rockies, the shadows and whispers remained, waiting for the next unfortunate souls to enter their domain. The Haunted Journey. A group of college students, eager for an adventurous weekend, boarded a train heading through the scenic routes of the Appalachian Mountains. The students Mark, Lily, Sam, Emma, and their history professor, Dr. Thompson, were on their way to explore an old mining town. Spirits were high as the train chugged along, with laughter and chatter filling the compartment. As the sun set, the train entered a dense forest, and the students' excitement turned into a subdued murmur. The ancient trees loomed over the tracks, casting long shadows that danced eerily with the movement of the train. Dr. Thompson, sensing the change in mood, decided to lighten the atmosphere with a story about the region's history. "You know," he began, "this area is famous for its ghost stories. They say many miners lost their lives in these mountains, and their spirits still roam the tunnels." The students listened intently, a mix of intrigue and nervousness in their eyes. As Dr. Thompson continued his tale, the train began to slow down. "That's odd," Mark said, peering out the window. "We're not supposed to stop for another hour." The train came to a halt in the middle of the forest. The conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the unexpected stop. We are experiencing technical difficulties and will resume shortly." The students shrugged it off and continued chatting, but an uneasy feeling lingered. Suddenly, the lights in their compartment flickered and went out. The train was plunged into darkness. "Everyone stay calm," Dr. Thompson said, pulling out his flashlight. "I'm sure it's just a minor issue." Minutes turned into an hour, and the train remained stationary. The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows, creating an oppressive atmosphere. Mark suggested they explore the train to see if they could find out what was happening. Reluctantly, the group agreed. Armed with flashlights, they made their way through the dimly lit corridors. Most of the other passengers were still in their seats, whispering nervously. As they reached the dining car, they found the staff huddled together, their faces pale with fear. "What's going on?" Lily asked. One of the staff members replied in a trembling voice, "The conductor is missing. He went to check the engine and never came back." A chill ran down their spines. Determined to get to the bottom of this, Dr. Thompson led the group toward the front of the train. As they passed through the carriages, they noticed strange symbols etched into the walls, glowing faintly in the darkness. "These weren't here before," Emma whispered, her voice shaky. They finally reached the engine room, only to find it empty. The controls were dead, and there was no sign of the conductor. "This doesn't make any sense," Sam said, frustration and fear evident in his voice. Dr. Thompson examined the symbols more closely. "These look like ancient runes," he said. "But what are they doing here?" Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the train, coming from the direction they had just come. They rushed back, their hearts pounding, only to find the dining car in chaos. Passengers were panicking, and the staff was nowhere to be seen. "We need to get everyone off this train," Dr. Thompson shouted. As they tried to organize an evacuation, the train jolted violently and began to move again, slowly at first, then gaining speed. The students and passengers clung to whatever they could to keep from falling. "Where is it taking us?" Mark yelled over the noise. The train barreled through the forest, the darkness outside becoming even more impenetrable. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, casting an eerie light throughout the carriages. Emma, staring out the window, noticed something moving alongside the train. "Look," she cried. Shadowy figures were keeping pace with the train, their eyes glowing red. Panic spread through the passengers as the figures began to phase through the walls of the train, attacking anyone in their path. Dr. Thompson tried to fend them off with his flashlight, but it passed through them harmlessly. "We have to get to the back of the train," he shouted. The group fought their way through the chaos, helping passengers as they went. The shadowy figures were relentless, their icy touch leaving marks on anyone they passed through. By the time they reached the last carriage, only a handful of passengers remained with them. The train entered a long, dark tunnel, and the shadowy figures disappeared. The sudden silence was almost more terrifying than the chaos. "What just happened?" Lily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Dr. Thompson replied, "but we need to find a way out of here." The tunnel seemed endless, and the oppressive darkness made it hard to breathe. Suddenly, the train came to an abrupt stop, throwing everyone off balance. The emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim red glow. "This is our chance," Mark said. "We need to get off the train now." They pried the doors open and stepped onto the cold stone floor of the tunnel. The air was thick with moisture, and the sound of dripping water echoed around them. "Stay close," Dr. Thompson instructed. "We don't know what's in here." They made their way through the tunnel, the light from their flashlights barely penetrating the darkness. Strange noises echoed around them, whispers, footsteps, and the distant sound of machinery. "This place gives me the creeps," Sam muttered. After what felt like hours, they came across an old, rusted gate. "This must lead to the surface," Emma said hopefully. They forced the gate open and stepped into a narrow passageway. The air was fresher here, giving them a glimmer of hope. As they moved forward, the passage widened into a large cavern. In the center stood an ancient altar, covered in the same runes they had seen on the train. "What is this place?" Lily asked, fear in her voice. "I think it's some kind of ritual site," Dr. Thompson replied. "But why is it here?" Before they could ponder further, the shadowy figures reappeared, surrounding them. "We're trapped," Mark shouted. The figures advanced, their red eyes glowing menacingly. Desperate, Dr. Thompson approached the altar, hoping to find something to use against the entities. On the altar, he found an old leather-bound book. He opened it, revealing pages filled with ancient incantations. "Maybe this can help," he said, frantically flipping through the pages. The shadowy figures closed in, their whispers growing louder. Dr. Thompson found a page that seemed promising and began to chant the words written there. The figures hesitated, their movements slowing. Encouraged, he chanted louder, and a bright light erupted from the altar, driving the figures back. The light grew brighter, enveloping the entire cavern. The shadowy figures shrieked and dissolved into the light, leaving the students and Dr. Thompson alone. The cavern walls began to crumble, and the ground shook violently. "We need to get out of here," Sam shouted. They ran back through the passageway, the tunnel collapsing behind them. Just as they thought they wouldn't make it, they burst through the rusted gate and into the forest. The fresh air filled their lungs as they collapsed on the ground, exhausted. They looked back to see the tunnel entrance sealed off by fallen rocks. "Is it over?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "I think so," Dr. Thompson replied, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. They made their way back to the nearest town, where they told their story to the authorities. The train was found abandoned in the tunnel, with no trace of the other passengers or the shadowy figures. The authorities sealed off the tunnel, declaring it too dangerous to enter. The students returned to their college, forever changed by the experience. They never spoke of that night again, but the memory haunted their dreams. The ancient ruins, the shadowy figures, and the haunted train ride remained a mystery, and deep in the Appalachian Mountains, the whispers and shadows awaited the next group of unsuspecting travelers to enter their domain.